Welcome to In Harmony with Nature. I'm Peter Shacklock, and I'll be host for this show tonight. Our guest today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce, is Andrew Hebda. Andrew's done a number of great programs for us. He's done at least 2 on the phosphorus, 1 on the smallmouth bass, and he brought his son in and talked about the little brown bats. His son Mydron was with us one show too. So Andrew, thanks for coming tonight.
Pleasure to be here.
Okay, and I guess we're going to learn about the brook trout. Talking before the show, I don't know very much about the brook trout, so hopefully you'll be able to fill me in on some details.
Sounds good. This is one of the species that, for some strange reason, has been extremely popular throughout the world, but certainly in Nova Scotia. And as early as the mid-19th century, it's one of the species that have been most published on of all the sports fish in the vicinity. If we can possibly go to the slides, the illustration that I've got ready there is from a book by Frank Forrester's Fish and Fishing from 1859, and it shows the brook trout in the configuration that we might know it. You can notice on the fish there, it's got a little fin, tiny little fin towards the tail. It's called an adipose fin. That's fairly characteristic of the family Salmonidae, the salmon and the trout. Now, the particular species, brook trout itself, has a scientific name, Salvelinus fontinalis. And it's one of these peculiar names because the word Salvelinus comes from, probably, as near as I can gather, from Isaac Walton's book, The Incomplete Angler. It refers to the old English word for char, and char are trout with very small scales. Now, I had some confusion on this because when I looked it up in the literature, it said small-scale trout, and I figured, well, these would be small fish, but it actually has very, very small scales, so you have several hundred along the lateral line, as opposed to substantially fewer for bigger fish. Fontinalis, the species name, refers to its habitat, its preferred habitat, which is basically spring-dwelling. So Salvelinus fontinalis is the spring-dwelling char.
And there is 2 different kinds of trout, or at least maybe more than 2, but I thought they were related to the salmon, the salmo group.
Well, these ones are quite separate from the salmon. The salmon belong to they're also salmonids, but the genus name is salmo, and that includes, on this coast, the Atlantic salmon. Previously, the rainbow trout had been put in that particular group. They used to be called Salmo gardneri, right. But in one of those strange twists of fate, there was a taxonomic revolution, and they've lumped it back in with the West Coast trout and salmon, which is where it originated, and they now call it Oncorhynchus mykius. So on this coast, anyways, the only native trout we have, actually our char, are the brook trout and the lake trout, which is the Salvelinus namaycush, which is another topic. And the other fish, of course, that we've had introduced into the province over the years, we've had rainbow trout introduced, and we've had brown trout introduced, and they both seem to have done fairly well at making a living, as it were, within Nova Scotia. I have an additional slide here. This was actually obtained from the Habitat branch within the DFO, and this is the way most people tend to see fish, specifically fish in general, but trout specifically in Nova Scotia. And that's a small brook trout. And the characteristics are quite clear here. You can see it is very, very colorful. It's got the orange side and belly, and the spots on the side. Now, what differentiates the brook trout from, say, things like salmon, especially salmon young ones, is that brook trout don't have any black spots on them. They have red spots, and you may get 8 to 10 red spots on the side, and you also have these white spots. Now on the slide you can see clearly just on the edge of the orange there, the red spots with a white ring around them.
And above that is the white spots for lack of black.
Right. We'll have a picture here in a second. This particular illustration shows the four species of trout that we have, and you can see the differences among them. The brook trout being on the top, and the spots there are the white spots. The second one down is the rainbow trout. As you can see, black and white pictures are great for color, but the dark streak they have in the middle of that is a reddish streak. The brown trout, the Salmo truta, again has black spots on it, and at the bottom there you can see the lake trout, again quite spotted. Now the other thing the brook trout has is on its dorsal surface, which is on its back, it looks like worm trail, sort of a wormy type of a squiggly vermicelli, that's it, type of a pattern, and that's also characteristic of the chars. So you'll find it in the brook trout and a bit in the lake trout. Now, just totally coincidentally, the brook trout and lake trout inhabit, relatively speaking, similar waters, but not the same habitats. The lake trout tend to use deeper waters, colder temperatures. They feed differently. However, they spawn at the same time, and in hybridization trials and in spawning trials, they've actually managed to cross the lake trout with the brook trout, which is also called the speckled trout, producing the splake. And the way they did this, they used male brook trout and female lake trout. And the interesting thing that came of that was that it turns out that the lake trout spawn at night, the brook trout spawn in the daytime. And
in normal conditions, they would never.
They would not meet. Yeah, they wouldn't interact at all. Yeah. And yet, when the two were put together in laboratories, and they actually produced fertile offspring. So then it's not a standard hybrid, which is sterile,
really?
So another cross that's been done with the brook trout is they've crossed brook trout with brown trout, producing something called a tiger trout, which has been in the news, was in the news several months back, and it's a sterile offspring, but a sterile hybrid, but it's quite interesting to see, because that mottled wormy type pattern that you get on the back of the brook trout covers virtually the whole of the body, and so it's quite an attractive fish. However, there are a lot of pros and cons in A, doing crosses, and B, of course, releasing fishes. Of course, I'm sure that's a topic all of its own. Yeah. I managed to get a little poster that's produced by Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and I made a slide of it, and it shows a bit of confusion that happens in the field sometimes. And you can see here you've got three fish. Actually, the top two are salmon, the bottom one's a brook trout. And on occasion there's confusion. People will catch what they think is a brook trout, but in actual fact is a salmon or salmon par. Yeah. You notice that on the side of the top fish and the bottom fish there, you've got these little marks. They're called par marks. And I think on the brook trout you've got I think it's 8. 1, 2, 3, 8, and on the salmon you've got a few more. You have to be careful not to confuse these, because if you catch a salmon par, it looks similar. But however, if you take that out, of course, it's not going to grow up to be full-fledged salmon. Same thing, I assume, would apply for the brook trout, but people don't seem to care too much about that. The thing to look for is you look for the sharpness on the fins, the dorsal fin, the big fin, the first one on top, and you can see it's very sharp on the salmon and curved back in. You've got a very deeply notched tail on the salmon par, which you don't have in the brook trout, and as well you've got this speckling, this spotting, and on the brook trout, as we mentioned before, there you've got the white spots with the odd red one. On the salmon par, you've just got black spots. You don't have any other. You don't have the other colored spots on it. And also on the dorsal fin there, you can see a bit of banding on it. So these are things to watch. So if you are fishing, make sure that, and you wish to keep the trout that you catch, make sure that what you have is actually a trout and not a salmon, because it's not just more sportsmanlike. It makes more sense from the biological and management point of view. Now, perhaps we can just do a quick review of the life history or the biology of the species. What essentially happens is, we'll start with the spawning. Spawning is going on, he says, right now, right this very moment. Brook trout spawn in Nova Scotia usually in around October, perhaps early part of November. They search out areas where you've got a particular size of gravel, relatively fine gravel, and you've got spring water upwelling up through the gravel, which helps to keep the gravel somewhat buoyant and also gives a continuous source of both well-oxygenated water as well as relatively constant temperature water. Now, once these eggs are laid, they stay in that gravel over winter, and it's a temperature-dependent process, but it could take up to, in the further north, takes up to 200 and some odd days for these eggs to develop and hatch. In around here, they generally tend to stay in that gravel up until end of March or so. So you're looking at essentially 4 to 5 months
Just being dormant.
Well, they're developing slowly, and they're at this constant temperature because of the spring water, and they tend to hatch out sort of end of March, beginning of April.
Hatch them.
Yeah. So there's quite a variation in the province between north and south, and there's variation from lake to lake. But in general, that's the pattern that's found. The other thing that the brook trout do, the sac fry, which is once they hatch, they have this egg sac still attached. They stay in that gravel for several weeks until that sac is somewhat more absorbed, I guess would be the word. And then they come out of the gravel and they start foraging as little fry and turning into little parr, and then and eventually then turning into mature adults. In Nova Scotia, the fish tend not to live very long. They tend to live maybe 4 or 5 years. Sea-run brook trout may live a little bit longer, possibly 6 or 7 years. It all depends on the specific place. So they become sexually mature after about 2 years. So it doesn't really give them a very long existence on the planet. In other places further north, you might find them living as long as 9 or 10 years. In California, in some of the plantings they've done that, they've actually, I think, managed to get them to live up to 11 years. But again, it's...
Would they spawn each year?
Once they're sexually mature, they should spawn each year. Okay. And each year of a female's life, she'll produce more eggs. She'll start out with a couple of hundred, maybe 200 or 300, and a fully mature one will probably produce around 2,000 or so eggs. So they're quite prolific. And they're quite large eggs as far as fish go. They're about they can be up to about half a centimeter, half a centimeter, a quarter of an inch or so in size. So it's as we say, a decent-sized egg as far as fish go. One way that a biologist can monitor the growth of a fish is by looking at scales. Now, we were talking about scales before, the small-scaled animals, the small-scaled fish. This particular slide shows a scale. It actually happens to be from a rainbow trout, but what you can do is you can see these dark lines, sort of like there are several
tree ring
type things. Yeah, you have different types of lines of growth are produced on a scale. Ones produced on a regular basis are called circuli, and ones on an annual basis. You get a major one produced on an annual basis, and that's called an annulus, or some of them are annuli. And the reason you can actually see a fairly dark one, sort of about a quarter of the way in from the outside. And the way that growth ring is produced is that the fish grows as it's eating, but when it comes to spawn, then it goes down in condition. Its fitness is reduced. It also it spends itself out. It produces all these eggs or sperm, as the case may be, and then it goes into winter with no feeding per se. So you've got very, very little feeding going on. So essentially its growth is retarded back, and they basically go down in shape, down in condition. And so you actually get a retreat of that growing edge. So you get a ragged edge on that. So what you can do, you can actually determine how old a fish is by looking at a scale, if it's got a good clear one, and count the number of rings like that. Now, also on that particular scale, that one that's about a quarter of the way from the outside is also got a spawning mark, because you can see it's quite ragged, it's quite broad, it's quite well defined. Whereas the earlier ones aren't quite as clear. So you can spend many fascinating hours over a microscope or with a projector and a mirror aging fish. It's an occupation fraught with many hazards, because if it loses a scale, for example, then that scale, the replacement scale, then has these gaps in years. So when you're taking scales off fish, you take several scales in case you have some damaged ones. The next thing, other than the afterlife cycle, is habitat. Now, in Nova Scotia, we find trout in lakes and streams and rivers. Most people tend to associate them with lake habitats. As a matter of fact, when we first moved here, that's the first place I said, this is great, you can catch trout right as soon as the ice is going out. And as a matter of fact, you'll tend to find trout in most lakes that haven't had substantial habitat alterations because of either factors as acid rain or cultural enrichment, eutrophication, or just changes in land use patterns. And what they require is the habitat requirements are very, very specific. Brook trout are very, well, I guess the word would be skitterish. They require cover. They respond very, very quickly to movement, shadows. That's why you notice you walk over a stream and any movement, zam, they're gone. And I suspect it's an adaptation or behavior that's in response to fish-eating birds or perhaps, well, of course you wouldn't find raccoons in the daytime, but That's one aspect. They require food, and the food is actually one of the fascinating things with brook trout, because it's a very plastic fish. Essentially, if it will fit in its mouth, it will eat it, or it will at least try to consume it. They require cover within streams or within lakes so that they can hide. They also, especially as juveniles, tend to be graziers or gleaners. They don't go floating around in the water column picking things off, but rather what they do is they go nipping things off the bottom, or grasping things that are growing on leaf surfaces and whatnot. So the other thing that they require is the water quality has to be high, and this is what makes trout actually a fairly good indicator of water quality conditions. It requires a high oxygen concentration, much higher than most other trout. It requires relatively low temperatures. Now I've been looking at that recently in my work, and actually the temperatures, they have quite a broad tolerance. They can actually be found up to about 25 or 26 degrees centigrade for short periods of time. But in general, they prefer cooler temperatures, and they require flow. They require current of some sort. So even if they're in a lake, even if they're living within a lake, they still require currents to help bring them food. There's some fascinating behavioral studies done showing how, given all things being equal, you end up with all of your trout sitting in the current. You put them in a lake and they end up in the current waiting for food to come to them. Now, one of the things that, as I said, they're very, very plastic in their feeding habits. There was a poster that was produced for the by the Provincial Department of Fisheries, and it shows fairly clearly that a trout found in different places within a habitat will eat essentially what is there, but what you find in, say, a fast-flowing stream in the upper headwaters is quite different from what you find down in the still waters and in a lake, as the case may be. And so although you'll find things like mayflies and stoneflies and things like black flies well up high, you'll notice that the top box shows the sort of the shapes and the types of organisms you'd find well up in the spruce bogs and headwaters. The middle one with moderate flows, you can see you've got similar species, but you've got some fish coming in there. You've got you can see by the shape of the animals. The
snails.
Snails. They tend to pick them up. The food tends to reflect the energetics of the environment. So the slower the current, the bulkier they are. They don't have to be streamlined.
Yeah.
And when you get down to the still waters down below, you can see that actually they'll go for things like leeches and a variety of different fishes and these lovely giant water beetles there on the right there. They're quite colorful. Actually, you can get some very, very substantial sized ones down in the south end of the province. Certainly, I wouldn't want to cross swords with those ones. But anyways, that's some of the material the Provincial Department of Fisheries has. The types of habitats that you'll see them in is when people tend to associate them with brooks and streams. Of course, brook trout. Obviously, they're not called lake trout, are they? Yeah. But in actual fact, you find them at different times of the year, such as in early spring, you find them still in the lakes with the cold water temperatures. You'll find them with the retreating ice at the outflows of lakes, for example, foraging quite well. But this slide here actually shows a more typical type of a habitat with a mixture of pool, riffle, and run. This is the type of things that you look that rabid or avid fly fishermen always look for. You've got this mixture of, you have flowing water with you've got good oxygenation going in there. You notice good cover from the sun, so the tree cover stops the heating there, and this particular one, you can see there's a bit of a run in there. See, it's nice still water, but it's moving quite well. You can see some logs going across. All these are factors that assist in providing cover in streams. And here you can see a nice riffle area in the foreground with a nice pool in behind. But again, you notice for all those like fly fishing, there's lots of places to get your flies hooked up on there without too much difficulty. So the key factors here, as in the habitats slide earlier, are that you've got a mixture. You've got that cover, you've got flow, you've got high oxygenation, and you've got the current coming through, so that you've got food coming through. And they tend to generally in the stream eat what are called drift organisms, and these are things that may fall in and float along the surface. or in actual fact many organisms are actually competing, many benthic organisms in the stream, such as mayflies, such as stoneflies and other things, are also competing for space amongst themselves. And what they do, as the light tends to fall in the evening, the ones that are losing the competition tend to get pushed out, so they drift downstream looking for new habitats. So in actual fact, most of the drift in a stream occurs after dark, and of course most of these fish feed in the daytime, so one can may deduce a cause and effect here if one looks at the features that are involved. Now, within a stream, if you're looking for trout, of course the question is where do you find them and why do you find them there? And I have a slide here that actually illustrates a bit of the basics behind the location of trout with respect to obstructions. Now this particular illustration, the following one, comes from a book called Reading Trout Streams, produced by a commercial company. It's actually quite well done. You can see with the boulder in the middle there, and the figures there, they're talking about this is a standard, this is not a metric system, they're talking 4 meters per second. The outside of the dotted lines is 4, and then you can see, I think, 2 and 0.5. Within that type of a stream, you can see that behind the, or downstream from the rock itself, you've got a very, very quiet area, and you've got this little cone where she's running around 2 feet per second. Now, if you actually look at fish in that kind of a situation, you'll see that brook trout tend to prefer roughly about 1.5 feet, 2 feet per second current. The reason is they have to maintain their position, so it costs energy to do so, but they also want to be in a place where they can, where food is going to be brought by them. Now, if they're sitting in the 4 foot a second area, of course the food's just zipping by, and it becomes not very energetically feasible to go chasing it. And of course, if you're sitting in the half a foot a second area right behind it, nothing's going to come there because of the nature of drifting organisms. So it's a question of energetics and games. Actually, fish play games. It's quite a fascinating thing. The other thing that you get is you get a turbulence effect within a stream. Anywhere you have an obstruction, the current no longer flows uniformly. Even in a stream, if they say the current in that stream is, say, 10 feet a second, it's 10 feet a second in the middle, but of course it decreases as you get closer to the edges because of the drag of the surfaces. And in this illustration, you can see if you have an obstruction from the side, the way that the currents are actually playing. So it's not a nice smooth type of a passage of water over, but rather complex. And so the being clever as they are, actually take advantage of those circumstances. And so if you can actually figure out how the current's flowing, you've got a fairly reasonable chance of figuring out where the fish would be. Now, tying back into one of the favorite topics on In Harmony with Nature is just a bit of a context of acid rain and acidity. Now, most of our waters have relatively poor buffering capacity for a variety of reasons, especially those waters overlying the maguma types of the mineralized slates and the granites. And there's an illustration on this slide from Environment Canada publication, and it shows the red dots indicate lakes that are relatively acidified. Now, this is data from the mid-'80s, and essentially you can see that most of those red dots occur actually overlying these granites and these slate areas, and there's poor buffering capacity there. Now, brook trout themselves are a little bit less sensitive to pH depression than many other species, and certainly as we were talking about smallmouth bass several months ago, they're certainly more tolerant to decreased acidity or lower pH, or increased acidity and lower pH. But even at pHs below 5 and certainly below 4.5, they're into serious trouble. You lose them. Below pH of 5, you run into substantial reproductive difficulties. Although you'll still find trout in many of the lakes of 4.6, 4.7, but you can see they're definitely not happy. They're not pleased to be there. So there is this difficulty that they have with very substantial depressions in pH. But again, they're a good indicator of water quality in that particular way. Now, one of the things in living in Nova Scotia recently, especially, there's with the change in jurisdictions within the provincial departments, and as well as the reshuffling within responsibilities between federal government and provincial government, the provincial Department of Fisheries has taken a fairly major role in the in management and interest in brook trout specifically, and fish in general. and they've produced a very large amount of educational material for the elementary schools. And it's material that's available, as I understand, for most, if not all, teachers. And they have things such as they have a fairly large package called Trout in Nova Scotia. They have the poster which you saw earlier on what trout eat. They have slideshows on where trout find food. So they've produced a large amount of material that's available, including a number of brochures. And there's one there produced on, I think it's called Know Your Trout. It's just a quick summary of a number of basic features in trout in Nova Scotia. So
where would you get a copy of that?
Well, according to this, it says get in touch with the Minister of Fisheries. However, I think if you phone the department, they should have them here in Halifax, but they've been produced, I think, out of PICTU, which is the Inland and Fisheries Division. And I'm sure if you phone the office in Halifax, they would set you in that direction. The other source of information in general is Fisheries and Oceans Canada, who has a bit of information on such, and they have in their Underwater World series, they have one on, and that one's called Trout in Canada's Atlantic Provinces, and that's the one where, for example, that information of how well it come through here on different species. So they have a number of different species covered there, and these are available through the communications branch in Fisheries and Oceans Canada. So it's one of these things where everybody's been interested in it for so long, and even within DFO, their mandate is somewhat broad-ranging when it comes to fish habitat specifically. So within fish habitat, although they concentrate very strongly on salmon and anadromous species, habitat requirements for brook trout are very similar to habitat requirements for salmon. So there's obviously a difference. Otherwise, if they had the same habitat requirements, they wouldn't coexist, or they wouldn't interface. So
we finished with the slides, I guess.
Yes, we're
there's just one question I have to ask, or one comment I should make.
Yeah.
I should have introduced you as a PhD student at Dalhousie University. My question to you is, what's your topic? Is it on fish?
It has to do with smallmouth bass and brook trout. The specific question I'll be approaching, I have to fine-tune that yet. But essentially, I hope to be addressing the effect of with the introduction of smallmouth bass into lakes, not just in Nova Scotia but throughout North America. There appears to have been a concurrent decline in brook trout. Now, the trout decline for a variety of reasons, be it changes in the trophic status of the lakes and pH and of a wide variety of factors. But what I'll be looking at, I hope to be looking at, is some very specific interactive relationships between them. So, the only other thing, one last slide is just sitting there. I don't know if you can...
No, I don't think we can catch it. We've been asked to wrap it up, but we've really enjoyed this, Andrew. Again, it may be 5 shows now, I think, you've done for us, and I really appreciate you coming in. Our guest today has been Andrew Hebda from the Biology Department of Dalhousie University. Good evening.